Y qué mejor que cerrar este gran día con la presencia de Tal Ben Shahar. ¿Están listos? Tal, bienvenido.
Hi, hello. Hi, everyone. Thank you. So wonderful to see you. So wonderful to see our students, our fellow journeyers from the Happiness Studies Academy, who are going to hear me for the 50th time. You know, when someone listens to me more than once, I only have one condition. I say to them, you can come as many times as you want. My only condition is that you have to laugh at the same jokes again. Other than that, it's fine. So I do want to start with one very important message, and this is actually to Nancy. I must say, after this introduction, which was amazing, thank you, Nancy, but I do feel a lot of pressure. So I will start by sharing with you, Nancy, another form of introduction that I received a few years ago, which maybe for next time you can learn from it. So I was giving a lecture at a large company in Silicon Valley, and it was their international gathering, and people came from all over the world, and I was the afternoon, like today, keynote speaker. And the CEO goes on stage, like Nancy, and he introduces me, and he says, "Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker today, Dr. Tal Ben Shahar." And the reason we invited Tal today to speak to us is because he's the cheapest speaker we found. Now, after that, I could do no wrong. It was easy. Today, it's a lot more challenging, but I'll do my best, I promise. You know that I love coming to Mexico. You know, people ask me, so is it your first time here? And I started counting, and I said, I think I've been here about 50 times. So I spent a lot of time in Monterrey, in Tec Milenio, in Tec de Monterrey, and many times in Mexico City, of course, and around your beautiful country. But the most beautiful thing about your country, and I hope you know that, are the people. The warmth, the generosity, the kindness that I experience here in Mexico is unparalleled. And this is why Mexico is among the happiest countries in the world, because of that warmth. So thank you for that, and also thank you for pronouncing my name correctly. So those of you who've heard me before know that my first lesson is about how to pronounce my name correctly, because in the US, you know, I've lived there for 20 years, longer. They don't know how to pronounce my name. They call me Tal or Tall. Makes me feel good, but it's not my name. Towel. Whereas when I come here, everyone pronounces my name. They say to me, "¿Qué tal, Tal?" So thank you for that. I really appreciate it. So we're talking about happiness at work. And it's an incredibly important topic. You know, I had one of my teachers, Warren Bennis, who died a few years ago. He was one of the leading researchers in the area of leadership and business. And he worked his entire academic career at a business school. But Warren Bennis was a very gentle man. He would always read literature and poetry. And I asked him once, "Warren, why did you choose to go to a business school? I would have thought that a person like you would have gone to a literature department, you know, teach Shakespeare. Why did you go to a business school?" And he said, "Because it's through business that we'll change the world for the better." And this is what we're about here. You see, people spend most of their waking hours at work. And it's not just that, because what happens at work is then carried over to what goes on at home. Because if they enjoyed higher levels of well-being in the workplace, they'll bring it to their children, to their partner, to their community. So it's not just the many hours that we spend at work that matter, it's also what happens after that matters a great deal. And if you increase levels of happiness in the workplace, what you find are many very important consequences. The first thing is you're happier, which is great in and of itself. But also happiness leads to other things which are significant, which makes happiness count and matter. The first thing is, if you increase happiness levels by a little bit, 3%, 4%, creativity goes up, innovation goes up. Now, how important is this today? Because if you're not creative and not innovative, well, then the computer can do it. ChatGPT can do it. And it's going to become even more sophisticated. So our added value as human beings is our ability to be creative, to think outside the box. Well, one of the ways to improve it is by increasing levels of well-being. Second, engagement and motivation go up significantly. So Daniel Goleman talks about our age as the age of distraction, meaning that people can focus today. You know, I used to teach teachers who come into a university, new professors, and they learned how to do research, but they didn't learn how to teach. So we take them through a course and help them become better teachers. And in the past, when I learned how to be a teacher, I was told that every 7 minutes, more or less, you need to change the pace. Maybe tell a joke or something. Maybe show a video to keep people's attention. Today, it's no longer every 7 minutes. Today, it's every 7 seconds that you need to change the pace. You know why it is 7 seconds? Because this is about the amount of time that people spend on a web page. So every 7 seconds, you click and you move on to the next. Thank you. Every 7 seconds, you click and you move on to the next page. And we have learned, we have trained our brains to keep attention for that long before we need a new dopamine shot, before we need new stimulation. So right now, no one's listening to me, actually, so I can say anything. Some of you, you're listening. Why increase levels of happiness? Because you increase engagement. People actually focus better. Do you have one that works? This one? Okay, it does. Good. Performance goes up. People do better in the workplace. When you increase levels of happiness by 3 or 4%, that's not a lot. In addition, physical health. Immune system strengthens. You actually live longer when you increase levels of happiness. Now, does that mean you need to be happy to live long? No, it means you need to increase your levels of happiness by a little bit in order to live longer. And these are things that we can do. I'm going to talk about some of the things. Relationships at home with our loved ones. Teamwork in the organization improves significantly as a result of increase in happiness. And the bottom line of this all is that happiness pays. It's a good investment. It's a good investment for you as an individual. It's a good investment for your team. It's a good investment for your organization. It's a good investment for the family. Okay. So happiness is a good investment. We've established that. Great. And if I was speaking with you 4 years ago, this is where I would have stopped. And I would have said, all right, now let's talk about how we can increase levels of happiness. But the world changed 4 years ago. First of all, we had COVID. Now we're sort of out of it. But we have wars going on in the Middle East, going on in Ukraine. Political situation is not great, just about in any country that you look, whether it's in Latin America, in North America, around the world. And today we are talking about happiness. That seems like incongruent. Maybe we should park happiness for a while. But when we look at the research, what we see is that today, in fact, is the most important time to talk about happiness, whether it's happiness at work, or happiness in the families, or happiness politically, or in our communities. So the question that I'd like to address now is why happiness matters today, actually even more so than ever. I want to introduce you to a concept, to an idea that was actually introduced by a Lebanese scholar, Nassim Taleb. Nassim Taleb today is a professor at New York University, and he introduced the concept, the idea of anti-fragility, which I've come to call resilience 2.0. So what is anti-fragility? Anti-fragility is the opposite of fragility. Resilience 2.0. Let's begin with resilience 1.0. You take a ball or a piece of rubber, you squish it, you put pressure on it. When you let go of the pressure, of the stress, if it's resilient, it goes back to its original form. Or if it's a ball, you drop it. If it's resilient, it bounces back up. That's why we talk about resilient individuals as bouncing back. Anti-fragility, resilience 2.0, takes this idea a step further. So you take the same material and you put pressure on it. If it's resilient, it goes back to where it was before. If it's resilient 2.0, anti-fragile, it actually grows bigger, stronger, better as a result of the pressure. Or a ball, you drop it. If it's resilient, it bounces back up. Resilience 2.0, it bounces back higher. Now, it turns out that there are anti-fragile systems all around us and within us. Let me give you a couple of examples, one physiological, the other psychological. Think about your muscles. You go to the gym and you lift weights. You're putting pressure, stress on your muscles. As a result of it, after you go to the gym twice, 20 times, 100 times, what happens to your muscles? They actually grow bigger, stronger, healthier, because we are physiologically, potentially, an anti-fragile system. Let me give you another example, this time psychological. So, I want to see a quick show of hands. How many of you have heard of PTSD? Show of hands. Okay. PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder is something that we read about in the newspaper, we read about it in psychology textbooks. When I ask my students, just about everyone knows what PTSD is. Now I have a second question for you. I'd like you to put your hand up if you're not my student, meaning if you have not heard me talk about this before. Please put your, one second. Please put your hand up if you've heard of the term PTG. If you've heard of the term PTG, please put your hand up, and you're not my student. 1, 2. Okay, thank you. So it's about 1 to 2% of the population have heard of PTG. PTG stands for post-traumatic growth. So PTSD is breaking down after trauma. PTG is growing stronger after trauma. Anti-fragile. Now, it turns out that post-traumatic growth is potentially twice as likely as post-traumatic stress disorder. In other words, anti-fragility is potentially twice as likely as fragility. If, and this is a very big if, first of all, we know about it. Meaning just knowing about post-traumatic growth actually makes it more likely to happen. Now, most people have never heard of post-traumatic growth, even when I ask my students. And most of them are psychology in college, in university. Most of them are psychology majors. They've never heard of PTG. Everyone knows what PTSD is. Hardly anyone has heard of PTG. And not knowing about it means that it's much less likely to happen. Second, there are certain conditions that we can put in place in order to significantly increase the likelihood of post-traumatic growth. Nothing can guarantee it. However, there are certain things that we can do to increase the likelihood that we will grow. Now, there are many things that we can do, and in our programs, at the Happiness Studies Academy, we study it for a year. If we're doing the certificate program, we do it for 2 years when we're doing the master's program, actually for a lifetime. Because we continue to meet, even after the official program is over. Because there is so much material, and material that comes out all the time, that essentially talks about not just how to increase happiness, but how to make us more resilient, more anti-fragile, more likely to grow after hardship. And this is why the science of happiness is so important. And this is why having the World Happiness at Work Summit is so important, even during, or especially during, these difficult times. Because what we want to do is, yes, increase levels of happiness, but no less important, cultivate Resilience 2.0, cultivate anti-fragility, PTG in the workplace, in our homes, in our communities. So that when hardship happens, and it does, on the individual level or on the collective level, we will be ready and we will be able to grow, to experience Resilience 2.0, anti-fragility, rather than to break down. The problem today is that not enough people know about it. And your role as ambassadors of happiness is to introduce these ideas. First and foremost, in your families at home, in your teams at work, so that more people can become anti-fragile and grow through hardship. You know, when I was growing up, I would often hear the phrase, things happen for the best. And I must say, I never connected to that. What do you mean things happen for the best? People died from COVID. Is that for the best? People right now, as we speak, sitting here, are dying in war. For the best? So I never really connected to that. But one thing I do connect to, that while things do not necessarily happen for the best, we can choose to make the best of things that happen. Again, while things don't necessarily happen for the best, we can choose to make the best of things that happen. And one of the ways to choose to make the best of things that happen is to learn about ideas like this, and even more importantly, to apply these ideas in our lives and to help others do the same. So what I want to do now that you've been introduced to these concepts, is introduce you to some of the conditions that you can put in place today, tomorrow, at home and in the workplace, that will help increase the likelihood, not guarantee, because nothing can guarantee, but significantly increase the likelihood that you will enjoy post-traumatic growth, or that you will become anti-fragile and help others do the same. So I'm going to talk about some things, and those of you who have heard me speak before probably heard me talk about these things, but these are the essentials. Unfortunately, we don't have that much time, because I was told that they want you, Nancy said she wants you out of this room by midnight. So I'm going to have to be very, very brief. And just talk about 3 things that you can introduce in your life. The first of them is what I've come to call the permission to be human. I first thought about this idea 20 years ago when I was teaching my class at Harvard. At that time, I had 8 students take my class. 2 of them dropped out, which left me with a broken ego. And I remember having lunch one day when a student came over. And he said to me, he wasn't in my class, but we knew each other. He said, "Tal, may I join you for lunch?" And I said, "Sure." So he comes and he sits down, and he says to me, "Tal, I hear you're teaching a class on happiness." And I said, "That's right, positive psychology." And he said, "My roommates are in your class." There were 2 of the 6, so I really had to be nice to him. And then he said to me, "But you know, Tal, now that you're teaching this class, you've got to be careful." And I said, "What?" He said, "Tal, you've got to watch out." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because if I see you unhappy, I'll tell my roommates." And I actually used that in class the following day when I addressed my students, all 6 of them. And I said, "You know, the last thing in the world that I want you to think is that I'm always happy, or that you, by the end of the semester, will experience a constant high. There are only 2 kinds of people who do not experience painful emotions, such as sadness, or anger, or frustration, or envy, or fear. 2 kinds of people who do not experience painful emotions. The psychopaths and the dead people." Exactly. So if you experience painful emotions, it's actually a good sign. It means you're not a psychopath and you're alive. Good place to start. We can build on that. The problem in today's culture, though, is that most people, most of the time, do not give themselves the permission to be human. Why? There are many reasons. One reason is because of social media. What do we see on social media? Mostly we see that everyone is doing great. Everyone's doing great except for me. Now, I don't want to be the only one who's not doing well, so I put similar posts on, as if everything's perfect in my life, contributing to the great deception that is largely responsible for the Great Depression. Why? Because there is a paradox at play. And the paradox is that when we reject painful emotions, when we do not allow it to flow through us, what happens is that that emotion, that pain, only grows stronger. So when you reject something, it actually increases. In the words of Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist, what you resist persists. So if I say to myself, "Tal, you shouldn't be sad, you're the happiness professor," immediately what happens? My sadness goes up. Or if I say to myself, "Tal, you shouldn't be envious, jealous of your friend, you should be better than that," immediately my jealousy, which is a natural human emotion, goes up. And it's paradoxically when I allow these emotions, whether it's sadness, whether it's envy, whether it's fear, to flow freely through me, that's when these emotions do not overstay their welcome. They leave just as they came. Why does it work that way? So I'm going to do an experiment with you that I'm after all a psychologist. I like experiments, but I promise you this one doesn't hurt much. So for the next 10 seconds, do not think of a purple elephant. Do not think of a purple elephant. You know the one I'm talking about? Big ears like Dumbo. Do not think of a purple elephant. And what happened? You probably thought of a purple elephant. Why? Because when we try to reject a natural phenomenon, such as not thinking about a word that we hear over and over again, that phenomenon grows stronger. Well, painful emotions are a natural phenomenon. And when we try to reject them, they grow stronger too. You know, my biggest challenge, and again, my students know this, my biggest challenge since I decided to become a teacher, since I decided that my calling in life was to teach, was that I'm an introvert, that I'm shy. And initially, when I would get on stage, I would be very nervous. So I would tell myself before going on stage, Tal, don't be nervous, don't be anxious. And what do you think happened? Purple elephants all around. The anxiety goes up because what you resist persists. Whereas after learning about this paradox, whether it's by Viktor Frankl, who talks about paradoxical intentions, or Daniel Wagner, who talks about ironic processing, I realized that what I needed to do was the exact opposite. Invite the emotion in, welcome it. You know, I was standing here and, you know, seeing Nancy with this amazing introduction, and I was feeling nervous. But instead of telling myself, don't be nervous, don't be anxious, I said to myself, I'm so lucky. I'm not a psychopath and I'm alive. Let's do it. The permission to be human. You know, so one of the things that we do in our program in the Happiness Studies Academy, we meet, and we meet a lot. So tomorrow we're flying over to Colombia, and we're going to spend we're going to spend 3 days together in Cartagena, and 3 months or 2 months ago, I went to France and I met some of our fellow journeyers in Evian, and one of our students who met me and said to me, "Tal, I must say I'm really surprised. You are very shy. You are really an introvert." So, you know, when students see me on stage like this, they say, "Oh, he's just saying it to teach an idea." But that's not the case. I do get nervous. I do get anxious. I apply these ideas every day to my life. And I see it working on the individual level. I see it working with my kids. You know, they're athletes. So they get nervous before a big game. And I tell them, embrace the anxiety and the nervousness. Or before a test in school. I see it in the workplace. You know, when managers start a new project, don't fight the anxiety. Don't fight the fear. Embrace it. Accept it. It's the first step to a healthy life. It's the first step to fulfilling our potential. And it contributes to anti-fragility. It also works on pleasurable emotions. You see, all of our emotions flow through one pipeline. Not two pipelines, one pipeline. Which means that if I try to block anxiety, I'm also, not on purpose, blocking excitement. If I try to block envy, which is, again, a natural human emotion, I'm also blocking love from freely flowing through me. And if I try to block sadness, I'm also blocking joy. In the words of Golda Meir, who was Israeli Prime Minister back in the 1970s, those who don't know how to weep with their whole heart don't know how to laugh either. There are two sides of the same emotional system. Now, when I talk about permission to be human, I'm not talking about resignation. I don't mean just, okay, so go home and lie down in front of the TV and do nothing for 3 months. Not at all. What I'm talking about, rather, is active acceptance. Accepting the emotion and then choosing the most appropriate course of action. You see, there is a very important distinction that you need to make between emotions and behavior. Emotions are not good or bad. Is the law of gravity good or bad? No, it's simply part of nature. So are emotions. They're simply part of nature. I'm not a bad person if I experience envy towards a friend. It simply means I'm human. When it comes to behavior, that's a whole different story, because behaviors are good or bad. So if I hurt that friend, then that's not nice. If I'm nice and generous, then that's good. And the paradox is that when I accept the emotion of envy, I'm in a much better place to be able to choose my behavior. Because remember, if I reject it, it grows stronger. It's more likely to control my behavior. Because many people have this idea that, oh, I'm feeling jealousy towards my friend. It means I'm not nice. I need to stop feeling envy. And what happens when you say to yourself, stop feeling envy or stop feeling anxiety? It grows stronger. What you resist persists. Or think about fear. I'm not a coward if I feel fear. Courage is not about having fear. It's about having fear and going ahead anyway. What matters much more is the behavior than the feeling. Accepting the emotion, that's key. That's the foundation. But there is another thing that we need to know, to understand about emotions, and that is how to express them. So let me count the ways. One way is by shedding tears. You know that when you cry, you release oxytocin. That's the love hormone. It makes you feel all good and mushy inside. When you cry, you release opiates, naturally occurring chemicals, drugs, to the right amount, right degree, that calm you down. Look at how brilliant our system is. The thing is, we mustn't get in the way of our system. Because you see, we have a natural healer within us. And if you let it do its thing, cry when you feel like crying, it will take care of you. But if we get in its way and say, I'm not going to cry, I'm going to be strong, then we prevent ourselves from fully healing. Another way of expressing rather than suppressing emotion is talking about it. Think about a modern phenomenon, a very strange modern phenomenon called therapy. How is it that we go to a therapist's office, we spend 15 minutes there, we basically talk. All they do during those 50 minutes is nod. Sometimes they nod off to sleep. At the end of the 50 minutes, we pay them a lot of money. And we feel better about ourselves. Strange, isn't it? You know, imagine a Martian coming in and looking at this phenomenon. No, because what happens during those 50 minutes is that we have a safe environment. We can express rather than suppress our emotions. And we feel so much better. Or talking to our best friend. We express rather than suppress, giving ourselves the permission to be human. So we can cry, we can talk, or we can write about it. There's a lot of research done in Mexico, in the US, in Japan, by Jamie Pennybaker, Laura King, and others, showing that people who write about hardships and difficulties are much more likely to overcome those hardships and challenges. 2 months ago, Jamie Pennybaker published another study on trauma, showing that people who write about the trauma are much more likely to experience PTG, post-traumatic growth, in other words, to become anti-fragile as a result of writing about it. Now, how long? Initially, the protocol was 20 minutes on 4 separate days when you write about your hardships or your trauma. And those 80 minutes led to impact that lasted for even a year later in terms of lowering anxiety levels, increasing resilience 2.0. But even writing for 2 minutes can go a long way in helping you feel better, helping you grow stronger physically as well, because mind and body are one. So this is the permission to be human. The first step of cultivating anti-fragility, or to put it more generally, beyond just talking about anti-fragility, the first step to happiness, whether it's at work, whether it's at home, on the individual or the collective level, the first step to happiness is allowing in unhappiness. I want to move on to a second condition that triggers the anti-fragile system, and that has to do with the pandemic. But not the pandemic that you're all thinking about, COVID, but one that long preceded it, and that is the stress pandemic. You know, stress is a huge issue today. Levels of anxiety are at the highest levels we've ever measured, and we've been measuring for decades. In the United States, 94% of college students, that's 18 to 22-year-olds, 94% experience stress and are overwhelmed by everything that they have to do. I don't know what the other 6% are on, but they seem to be doing okay. Mexico quickly catching up with the United States. The rest of the world, China. Chinese government before COVID said, we need to take better care of the rising stress levels in our population. Children and adults. The Chinese government said that, you know why? Because they found a very close connection between stress levels and suicide rates going up. The Australian government, around the same time as the Chinese government, this is before COVID, situation is much worse today, said we need to focus more on rising anxiety levels in schools and in the workplace. The Australian government said, anyone here from Australia? Anyone here been to Australia? Anyone here been to Australia? Okay, tell me, what do Australians have to be stressed about? I mean, really, I know there are kangaroos there, they're big, but seriously, the World Health Organization is talking about a pandemic that exists, whether it's in Australia or Mexico or Japan or Kenya. Look at some of the headlines from before COVID. More and more doctors are talking about stress as the silent killer. More and more schools are concerned about stress levels in the classroom. Workplaces are looking at productivity going down significantly as a result of rising levels of stress. What do we do about it? Well, hopefully by the end of this presentation, you will all feel a lot calmer. You will all look something like this. Replace the beer with tequila or Corona, works just as well. But seriously, what do we do about the rising stress levels? So my colleagues and I have been studying stress for the past 20 years or so. And what we found was that we were actually looking in the wrong place. That actually stress is not the problem. That actually stress potentially is good for us. Let me go back to the analogy I just gave a few minutes ago. You go to the gym and you lift weights. What are you doing to your muscles when you're lifting weights? You're stressing them. Is this a bad thing? Not at all. Because you go to the gym today and you lift weights, and after 2 minutes you lift the same weights, and 2 days after you go back to the gym, and 2 days after that you go back again, and that's how you grow stronger, bigger, healthier. We are potentially an anti-fragile system. Stress is good for us. When do the problems begin? The problems begin when you go to the gym and you lift weights, and a minute later you lift the same weights, and a minute after that more, and then the following day, not after 2 days, the following day you go back to the gym, more weights, and more, and more. And the following day again. And what happens? You get injured. What happens? You grow weaker rather than stronger. But the problem is not the stress, which is potentially good for us. The problem rather is the lack of recovery. whether it's in the gym physiologically or in life psychologically. You see what happy, healthy, and successful people do, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's at home. Parents, they experience stress just like everyone else does. Raising a family is stressful. Working in today's climate, in today's organizations, is stressful. The thing, though, is that stress without recovery leads to fragility. That stress with recovery leads to anti-fragility, to growing stronger, bouncing higher. In other words, it's the recovery that triggers the anti-fragile system. And you can introduce this recovery on multiple levels. Let me give you a few concrete examples, because here I want to be very specific of things that you can start doing even now during this presentation, and of course in the workplace. So let me begin talking about micro-level recovery. That's about taking a break every 2 hours or so for 15 minutes. Go for a walk, do meditation if that's your thing. Have a meal by yourself or with your colleagues, but not a meal when you're on the phone and doing work at the same time. That's not recovery, that's simply more stress. Or exercising. You know that there is research showing that regular physical exercise, as little as 30 minutes 3 times a week, 30 minutes 3 times a week, has the same effect on our psychological well-being as our most powerful psychiatric medication. In fact, it works in the same way. It releases norepinephrine, serotonin, dopamine, the feel-good chemicals in the brain. 30 minutes 3 times a week of aerobic exercise. It could be walking or jogging or playing ball or swimming, or what do you think is the best form of exercise, psychologically speaking? What do you think? So there are 2 answers to this. The first answer is, in general, it is dancing. So why? Because, first of all, you're doing it with someone else. Sometimes you're moving in different directions. You are usually smiling when you're doing it. You're having fun. So in general, it's dancing. But there is this very specific answer to you and to you and to you. And the answer is your favorite form of exercise. Why? Because that's where you're most likely to persist. So if it's dancing, amazing. If it's swimming, great. If it's going for a walk with your friend, that's fine. If it's watching Netflix while you're on the bike, that's great. It doesn't matter. As long as you move it, move it. At every age, it's important. You know, our kids, we have 3 teenagers. The 3 of them were in school during COVID, and the 3 of them were on Zoom every day because we were quarantined. I never asked them during COVID how school was going. If they wanted, they told me. If there was a problem, the teacher called. And thankfully, she called a few times. But every day, I would ask them about their exercise, whether they moved. Because I know what goes on in the teenager's brain. If you happen to look at a teenager's brain, you know, through brain scans, God help us. Without exercise, we're lost. To make sure that they exercise. Children who exercise are not just happier, they're physically healthier, they are better at school, they can focus more. Violence go down significantly by over 60% in schools that exercise regularly. At every age in the workplace, employees become more productive, more innovative. Teamwork improves. All the things that I listed previously happen as a result of physical exercise in the workplace. If you're a manager, one of the most important things that you can do is lead by example, of course. Go out and exercise. Invite them over too. It will benefit everyone at every age. Listen to this statistics. This is John Ratey, Harvard Medical School, showing that regular physical exercise, even if we started later on in life, reduces the likelihood of Alzheimer and dementia by 52%. There is no medication that comes even close to having this effect. 52% reduction. When I heard of this study, I called up my mom immediately. And I said to her, Mom, because that's her name, I said to her, Mom, you know, until recently I recommended that you exercise. Well, I'm no longer recommending it. Now I'm demanding it. Just so you know, I never talk to my mom like this. I honor my mother and my father. But I did then. Why? Because my grandmother, my mom's mom, died with Alzheimer. My aunt, Alzheimer. And there is unfortunately a strong genetic element to it. So I told my mom, you have to exercise. If not for yourself, then for your children and grandchildren. And she started doing it religiously. 3 times a week during COVID, went up to 5 times a week. It's still 5 now. You know, many people ask me, so Tal, how did things change for you with COVID when things became more challenging? And I said, I keep on doing the same things, only more of them. So until today, instead of 3 times a week, I exercise 5 times a week. Going back to basics, just more of them. Here is another basic intervention. So this story is about a friend of mine, a colleague, who's considered one of the world's leading experts on stress. So he was invited by a New York trading firm. And he was invited to give a talk about stress. Why? Because employees in that organization were really struggling with rising levels of stress. Employees were getting sick, were leaving the workplace, saying that it's because of the stress, were underperforming, attributing it to stress. So he comes in and gives them a lecture very similar to what I'm talking to you about right now. Saying to them, stress is not the problem is lack of recovery. At the end of the talk, they go to him and they say, Doctor, we love what you had to say. Now give us prescriptions, please. So he said, okay, here is what I'd like you to do. Every 2 hours, I want you to take a break from trading. And you know what trading is? It means buying and selling stocks, meaning being on that screen, looking at the prices go up and down. Take a break for 15 minutes every 2 hours. Go for a walk. This was in New York. Walk around the block, get a cup of coffee, meditate, exercise, whatever. And they said, you're joking, right? He said, why? He said, we can take 15 minutes off. You know what can happen in 15 minutes on the world markets? He said, oh, how about 5 minutes? They said, no, we have our lunch in front of that screen. He said, wow. He thinks for a few seconds and then he said, how about 30 seconds? Can you spare 30 seconds? They think for a few seconds and they said, 30 seconds we'll give you. What have you got quickly? He said, okay, here is what I'd like you to do. What I'd like you to do is every 2 hours, stop, pause. During those 2 hours, after those 2 hours, pause for 30 seconds, and during those 30 seconds, take 3 deep breaths. So, 5 to 6 seconds in, through your nose if you can, all the way down to your belly, and then 5 to 6 seconds out, if you can, through your nose. Slowly and gently. 5 to 6 seconds in, and out, 3 deep breaths. If you really want to go wild, 4 deep breaths. But 3, good enough. And they said, we'll do it. And he said, but I don't want you to just do it today and tomorrow because you remember that I was here. I want you to do it day in and day out, consistently. And they said, you've got a deal. And they created reminders around the office. Whether it was, they wrote breathe on a piece of paper and stuck it on the wall. Or their screensaver. Or their smartphone reminded them every 2 hours to pause for 30 seconds. Or they wore a bracelet as a reminder. A bracelet, low tech, very easy, reminder. For them, it was to breathe. You can use it for anything you want, to be kind, or to be present, or to say something nice to someone. So they had reminders around their office, and they introduced those 3 to 4 deep breaths every 2 hours. After 1 month, the organization looked, felt, and performed at a whole different level. Why? Because stress is not the problem. Never was. It was always about the lack of recovery. I want to teach you now 2 more types of breath that you can introduce as a form of mini recovery. Because breathing is among the most powerful interventions that we have for dealing with stress, for introducing recovery into our life. The first form of breathing is what has come to be known as the 4-7-8 breath. What is the 4-7-8 breath? It's very simple. To the count of 4, and it can be 4 seconds or slower than 4 seconds or faster. Depends what's comfortable for you. To the count of 4, take in a breath through your nose. When you get after 4, count 7, hold the breath at the top. And after you hold it for 7, breathe out for 8. So 4 in, hold for 7, and then out for 8. And then again, 4 in, 7 hold, out for 8. 3 such sets, 4 such sets, takes a minute, can go a long way in resetting your system, triggering the anti-fragile system. That's breath number 2. Breath number 3, I just learned about this recently from Andrew Huberman, who's a neuroscientist at Stanford University. It's called the physiological sigh. Here is what it looks like. Once again, through your nose, take a deep breath in all the way down to your belly. When you get to the top, take another breath. So a topping to that breath. So it looks like this. And then breathe out. And again. Three such sets. That's all. Triggers the anti-fragile system. Shifts you from the fight or flight response to what Herbert Benson from Harvard Medical School calls the relaxation response. Now, these are such simple interventions, and they have such powerful impact on our overall well-being. So it could be this, it could be the exercise, it could be an hour meditation or 5 minutes of meditation. The key here is consistency. Create reminders so that you do it day in and day out. And that's when it's going to make the difference in your life, in your office, in your homes. Then there is mid-level recovery. Getting a good night's sleep. And if you don't fall asleep, don't worry about it. Don't stress over it. Just lie down in bed. But don't lie down in bed with your phone. Because your phone drives sleep away. You know, most of us are addicted to our phones. Now, imagine if you wanted to get rid of an addiction. Let's say you were an alcoholic. Would you go to sleep with your alcohol right next to you? Of course not. And yet we go to bed when our phones are right next to us. We need to keep that phone away. You know, at home we have a box where the kids and the adults put the phone when we go to sleep. We have places at home that are free of technology, like when we have dinner together. Another form of mid-level recovery is taking a day off. You know, even God needed a day off. I think there is an important message here for us mere mortals. People who take a day off are healthier, happier, more effective, more successful, more anti-fragile. And finally, that vacation. J.P. Morgan said, I can do the work of a year in 9 months, but not in 12. I can do the work of a year in 9 months, but not in 12. Now, most of us don't have the luxury of taking 3 months off, but even a week or 2 off, vacation, can go a long way in dealing with that stress, because stress is not the problem. When we don't have recovery, that's when the problems begin. You know, think about this analogy. Imagine you're a race car driver and you go around the track again and again and again. And after 40 laps, you need a pit stop. But you refuse, you continue to go around. What happens? One of two things happen. Either you run out of fuel or your tires will blow up. It's called burnout. It's called meltdown. It's called breakdown, which millions and billions of people are suffering from. Why? Not because of the stress, because they do not have enough recovery in their lives. Remember, stress without recovery leads to fragility. Stress with recovery leads to anti-fragility. So we talked about the permission to be human. We talked about recovery. One more topic, and that is giving. I want to share with you my favorite study in the field of psychology. So this is a joint venture between the University of British Columbia, Canada, and Harvard Business School. Here's what they did. They bring in people to the lab and they measure their levels of happiness. We know how to measure levels of happiness today. We do it through questionnaires, we do it through physiological measures, we even do it through brain scans. We actually know what a happy brain looks like. So they measure their levels of happiness, and then they give them a nice sum of money. And then they tell them, take this money and go spend it on yourself. Go buy yourself something. And they do. And they go and they buy themselves a gadget, or they buy themselves shoes, or whatever. And they go back to the lab after shopping. And they measure their levels of happiness again. What do you think they find after buying themselves a gadget or shoes? What happens to the happiness level? Goes up significantly. This is important research. This is the first time in recorded history where we have scientific evidence for Carrie Bradshaw's claim from Sex and the City that buying shoes makes you happier. So have we found the secret to happiness? Shoes? Shopping? Not so quickly. Following day, they go back to the lab and they measure their levels of happiness again. What do you think they find? After 24 hours, happiness levels go right back down to where they were before. In other words, there is a shopper's high. It lasts for 1 day. So what's the conclusion from this research? You need to buy shoes every day. Exactly. I see some of you are laughing, others are about to cry. Permission to be human. The natural healer does its thing. Fortunately, there is another part to this study. Another group of people come in one by one. One by one, they measure their levels of happiness. One by one, they give them the exact same amount of money as before. One by one, they tell them, go spend this money. Only this time they say to them, go spend it on someone else. And they do. And they go out and they give homeless people meals. They buy them meals. Or they donate it to their favorite charity. Or they buy their partner shoes. Whatever they do, as long as they spend it on someone else. They go back to the lab and they measure their levels of happiness after their act of charity. What do you think they find? Happiness levels go up to the exact same degree as the happiness levels of the shoppers, with one big difference. Exactly. The following day, when they go back to the lab, they measure their levels of happiness again. And it does go down a little bit, but it's still significantly higher than it was a day before. Even after a week, they still find the impact of giving on their happiness levels. To give is to receive. One of the best ways to increase our levels of happiness, one of the best ways to become more resilient, to become anti-fragile, is through acts of charity. And not just material giving. It's also spiritual giving. such as in the form of kindness. Research by Sonia Lubimirsky from UC Riverside shows that if you commit to 5 extra acts of kindness a week, little things, it doesn't have to be major. What you're doing is not only making the world a better place, you're becoming happier, you're becoming healthier, you're becoming more anti-fragile. And the nice thing about kindness, as Anne Frank wrote back in the 1940s, you can always give something, even if it is only kindness. We see this in the workplace, one of the best ways to create healthy teams. One of the most effective ways to create healthy organizations is to create kind organizations. Now, how do you do that as an employee or as a manager? 50 years ago, psychologists started to look for the single characteristic that more than anything else defines what makes for great leaders. And what they identified was that the single characteristic that makes for great leaders is not their charisma. Nice to have, absolutely not necessary. It's not how brilliant they are. It's not how well they can think strategically or what great vision they have. Nice to have, not essential. The key to extraordinary leadership, which is essential in extraordinary times like today, is listening. In other words, giving your ear, giving your attention. You know, there is a beautiful biblical story about Moses. And when Moses was chosen by God to lead his people from slavery to freedom, the initial response from Moses is, "Thanks, but no thanks, God. I'll skip this one." And what was Moses' excuse? Why didn't he want to be the leader that God wanted him to be? Because he said, "Because I stutter, because I have a speech impediment, I don't talk well." And yet God chose him. Now, whether you accept the Bible as the Word of God or you see it as a nice collection of stories, your pick. But there is a very important message here. And the message here in the Bible is that what's more important than being able to talk as a leader, it's to listen. And today, the research shows that. And I want to draw on one more wisdom from the Bible. You know, my mother tongue is not English. English is my second language. My mother tongue is Hebrew, which is the language of the Bible. And my favorite Hebrew word is the word to give. In Hebrew, the word to give is Natan. You know the name Nathan? So Nathan in Hebrew, Natan, to give. This is how you would spell it in Hebrew letters and in Roman letters. Do you notice anything unusual about this word? Exactly, it's a palindrome. It's symmetrical, left to right and right to left. It's no coincidence. There's a lot of wisdom in ancient languages. And the wisdom here tells us that when you give Natan, you're given right back. And today we have the research to back that up. One of the most powerful ways to increase levels of happiness, physical health, resilience, and anti-fragility. Through generosity, kindness, listening, giving. I want to end with one final study. This is by Adam Grant, who today teaches at Wharton Business School. Here is what Adam's research shows. He identifies in the workplace 3 archetypes, 3 types of people: the givers, the takers, and the matchers. Givers are the nice ones. They're generous, they're kind, they listen, they help, they contribute. We like them. Then there are the takers. Takers are all about me, me, me. Who do they take from? Mostly the givers who are willing to give. And then there are the matchers. Matchers are all about fairness. If you gave me 5, I'll give you 5 back. You just gave me 3, that's all you're getting from me, because it's fair. Now, we all have the giver, the taker, and the matcher in us. Part of human nature. The question, though, is which is more dominant? And it turns out that the more dominant one matters a lot. For example, research by Adam Grant and his colleagues show that in organizations, in your teams at work, you want to have as many givers as possible. It makes sense, right? Because givers are generous. They teach, they help, they contribute, they help everyone rise. So for organizational or team success, you want as many givers as possible. How about for individual success, though? What if you're concerned about your personal success or your child's success or your partner's success? What do you tell them? Go be a giver, or maybe a taker, or maybe a matcher. Here the answer is less clear-cut than it is for the organizations where we know that givers are best. So let's look at some of the results for individual performance. So what Adam Grant and his colleagues did was they divided up companies into 3 levels of performance. The best performers, the ones at the top in terms of performance, the average performers, the ones in the middle, and finally, the worst performers, the ones at the bottom. And they wanted to see, where do you find which of the archetypes? Now, no big surprise, you have givers, matchers, and takers at all 3 levels, but in very different proportions. So while you have givers, matchers, and takers at the top, disproportionately represented, you mostly find givers. Givers, what a relief. Whew. How about in the middle, the average? Again, you have givers, matchers, and takers here, but disproportionately represented are the takers. And the matchers. How about the bottom? Again, you have givers, matchers, and takers, the worst performers. Disproportionately represented are givers. Now, this is where research becomes interesting, because the question is, what's the difference? What's the difference between givers at the top and givers at the bottom? They're both nice, they're kind, they listen, they're generous, they're charitable, we like them, and yet there is a very big difference between these 2 groups. What's the difference? The difference is that the givers at the top also give themselves, whereas the givers at the bottom neglect themselves, forget themselves. They put themselves last. Whereas the givers at the top would say something when they're asked for help on a project, sure, I'll help you, but let me first clear my table or finish what I'm doing, and then I'll be with you. Or as parents, sweetie, mommy, daddy will be with you, but now I'm exercising or I'm spending time with a friend. In other words, they know how to put boundaries on themselves. So they take care of others and they remember to take care of themselves. Without taking care of themselves, they become fragile. It's not sustainable. When they also, not only, but also take care of themselves, that's when they're anti-fragile. And we're reminded to do that every time we get on a plane. You know, we don't even need this reminder, because every time we get on a plane, we're reminded that we need to take care of ourselves so that we can better take care of others. Or in the words of the Dalai Lama, caring for others based only on your sacrifice doesn't last. Caring must also feed you. And that is what I'm asking you to do. You know, the fact that you're here means that you care. that you care about happiness in the workplace. So continue caring about happiness in the workplace. Give, be generous, be kind, and take care of your own happiness as well. How? By giving yourself the permission to be human. Have space, a place in your life where you can write your journal, or talk about it with someone, or shed a tear. Recover, whether it's by exercising regularly, whether it's by taking those 3 deep breaths, or the physiological sigh, but do it regularly. Create reminders to do it day in and day out. Go to bed on most nights, regular hours. Take a day off or a vacation. Have meals with your family when you switch off technology, when you can really focus on one another. And continue to give. Continue to be generous and kind towards others and towards yourselves. I want to end with one final story. We're here in a summit, a conference on bringing happiness to work. Perhaps the greatest scholar of our time in the area of the workplace is Peter Drucker. Peter Drucker died in 2005 at the age of 94. Towards the end of his life, he was no longer strong enough to come to conferences like these or to go to organizations and consult there. But he was still completely lucid, in his late 80s, early 90s, and he still wanted to continue working, and there was certainly demand for his work. So instead of going to organizations and conferences, he had people come to him, and he lived in Claremont, California, and people would come in on a Friday and spend the weekend with him. And people from Fortune 500 companies would come, and politicians, presidents and prime ministers would come, and teachers. He worked in education. And on Friday, whoever came, whether it was the president of a country or a school teacher or a manager from an organization, when they came on Friday, he would say to them the following. He would always begin this way. He said, on Monday, when you go back to your work, to your life, he said, I don't want you to call me up and tell me how wonderful this weekend was. Even though, as you can imagine, these weekends with Peter Drucker were wonderful. But he said to them, I don't want you to call me up and tell me how great this weekend was. I want you to call me up rather and tell me what you're doing differently. Why? Because Peter Drucker, having worked with hundreds and thousands of change agents like you, understood that in order to bring about real lasting change, it's not enough to just understand an idea, to have an aha moment, a eureka experience, to know something. That's not enough. What you need to do is take your knowledge and apply it. And this is what I'm asking you to do once again. You see, this summit is wonderful. Over these 2 days, you will learn a lot. You've probably already learned a lot of things that you can apply in your life. But it's not enough to just understand what to do. The most important thing is take this understanding and apply immediately. Tomorrow, tonight, start a ritual, a practice, where you take these ideas, and again, whether it's the 3 deep breaths, or whether it's committing in writing, in your scheduler, on your smartphone, to 3 times a week of dancing or walking, or whether it's starting to keep a journal once a week, or whether it's learning more about your strengths and introducing them in a regular way at work, day in and day out. Whatever it is, take this idea and do something differently. Not 20 things, 1 or 2 things. Because you know, when you start doing these things, others will follow suit. Because what we know from a lot of research is that our behavior is contagious. So ask yourself, what are you going to do differently that's going to impact the world in a positive way? Maybe you're going to start exercising more and then getting others to do the same. Maybe you're going to express your emotions in a more open way, which will encourage others to do the same. Maybe you're going to commit to a few extra acts of kindness, and that kindness will become contagious, and we will have a kinder world, because that is what we need. We need a world with better role models. We need a kinder world, a healthier world, a happier world. And it's up to you, it's up to us to do that. No one else. It's up to us to do that. So let's start doing it right now, today, right here. Thank you. Thank you.